All right, we talk Ohio State football each and every Wednesday night with Brandon Zimmerman from the Buckeye Battle Cry. We also make these available to you, the entire version at Mark Rogers TV on YouTube, and you can even check us out live. So we are streaming live right now, 7:30, roughly 7:30 Eastern time each and every Wednesday. Brandon, how you doing tonight?
I'm good, Mark. How about yourself?
I'm doing just fine. So we are just a couple of weeks away from media days, and then of course right after that, since the Big Ten's pretty much the last major conference to partake of media days, I believe it's the 24th and 25th of July in Chicago, and then turn it right around and get ready for camp. That it's coming fast. It doesn't seem like it. It seems like it's been forever since we've seen any college football, but it's coming fast. So Brandon and I want to get you set for the positional breakdowns at Ohio State entering 2017. So we're going to talk one of the more controversial positions from 2016 and heading into 2017. So Brandon, as I did my homework and started looking at some of the players that we saw a little bit of last season, I wrote down like 11 or 12 guys and looking at the guys that came in February as well. So the top four offensive producers at wide receiver are gone from 2016, and 5 of the top 6. And when I say top producers, that's just by sheer numbers. We're not talking about 75 catch guys. Take a look at the wide receiver core and who you think may really need to be depended on this fall.
Well, yes, the wide receiver spot's definitely, I think, the most maligned positional group for the Buckeyes. Group known as Zone 6 really hasn't produced much 6 lately. Really outside of, I mean, they've had big-name guys that just isn't translating. I mean, when you look at a guy like Michael Thomas last year who went on to the NFL and had a very good rookie year, but as far as his time with the Buckeyes, he had a good season, but it's not the season you would expect from someone that stepped right into the professional league and dominated the way he did. This year, it was supposed to be Noah Brown to kind of step into that role, or last year, and it just never really happened outside of the Oklahoma game, which we've talked about. And so this is definitely the group. I think out of all the positional groups, the wide receiver is the one that needs to make the biggest leap this year. Not even the defensive backs who lost 3/4 of their starters. I have more confidence in them producing from the get-go than I do the wide receivers, and most of these guys have been around for a little bit of time. So really big year for it. Wide receiver group has no seniors, with James Clark transferring out. He went to Virginia Tech. It was announced earlier this week. So it's going to be led by 3 juniors. The big one there is Paris Campbell. Paris Campbell was starter for most of the year last year. The year before that, he started a few games. Started as a freshman first game, if you remember that. And then the Virginia Tech game where the Buckeyes lost that year, Paris Campbell actually started, had that big drop wide open for a touchdown. So he kind of showed flashes. Last year, he showed flashes again out at wide receiver. I just don't know if outside was where Paris Campbell needs to be. So this year they moved him into that H-back slot wide receiver role where Curtis Samuel played last year. I think that's going to be a really good move for him. I think Paris Campbell will easily have his best year there, not only because the Buckeyes kind of focus their offense around that H-back slot guy, but I think this is more suited for Paris Campbell to kind of use his speed off of cuts and kind of work his way around the middle, playing off the linebackers and the safeties. So Paris Campbell is one of those juniors going to have a big year. The other 2 juniors are 2 guys that are kind of talking about possibly starting this year. Both have played sparingly over the past couple years. You've got Johnny Dixon, who's been injured most of his first couple years with the Buckeyes. During the spring game this year, he really was healthy for the first time. Johnny Dixon was a big-time guy that the Buckeyes brought in back a few years ago. And appears to be finally healthy. Had 6 catches, 102 yards, and 2 touchdowns during that spring game. So he showed kind of what everyone's been waiting for from him. If he can maintain his ability to be healthy this year, I think Johnny Dixon is going to play a huge role for the Buckeyes. But we have to see if he stays healthy, much like we thought with Marshawn Lattimore last year, where there's that big asterisk kind of there where they have to stay healthy. The other junior is Terry McLaurin, who also played a lot last year, hasn't played a lot the past 2 years, really. Didn't really start too much, but really hasn't produced too much. So he really needs to make that giant leap this year during fall camp. Otherwise, he's going to get passed up by some of these sophomores and freshmen that are coming in, because the Buckeyes have been recruiting the wide receiver position very well, despite their lack of production from the wide receivers. So it's going to be a huge year for McLaurin. If he doesn't come out firing there in fall camp, I would not be shocked if he's passed by 1, 2, or 3 guys there. Down with the sophomores, you've got KJ Hill, who I'm a huge fan of. KJ Hill, I believe, was actually second on the team in receptions last year. And I believe that was only with like 18 catches or something. So that kind of shows where the Buckeye wide receiver core was last year. KJ Hill was another guy that was kind of injured early on in the season. Spent some time working his way back. Down the stretch, he really caught hot. His problem is he last year was backing up Curtis Samuel in that slot spot. This year he's backing up Paris Campbell. I'd really like to see KJ Hill move to the outside and see how he would do. I really think KJ Hill is one of their top 3 wide receivers. But just so far, they haven't really felt comfortable moving him out of that H-back spot yet. So regardless if he's H-back or on the outside, I think KJ Hill is going to have a pretty good year this year, even if it's just spelling Paris Campbell there at the H-back spot. With him as a sophomore, you've got 2 big-name guys from last year who showed flashes at time. You've got Austin Mack and Ben Victor. Neither one of them made a impact throughout the entire season, but they both showed kind of flashes here and there. Austin Mack last year in spring game, I want to say he had like 10 or 12 catches as a true freshman. Kind of got lost in the shuffle as the season went on. Ben Victor was someone that really didn't show too much early on. I think the Buckeyes were more worried about getting his weight up and stuff, because he came in, 6'4", I think he was like 170 or something. So has the speed, has the length, just wasn't able to do what the Buckeyes need wide receivers to do when they are on the field, and that's block. From the past couple of years that he puts a emphasis on wide receiver blocking. So when you're 6'4", 170, you're not going to really provide too much blocking. This year he's put on some weight. I believe he's up to 195 now. He's another guy that a lot of Buckeye people think that Ben Victor is going to be that guy that is able to be that number 1 type of wide receiver. He showed the big play ability at times last year in his limited spots down the stretch. 2 big catches against Clemson. He had a big catch against Michigan. So he's kind of looking – they're kind of looking at him to be that deep threat that Devin Smith always was. That they really haven't found since then. So that seems to be the question every year, is who's going to be the deep threat for the Buckeyes, and no one really knows. So those are the 3 sophomores. Then you got 4 freshmen coming in this year. You've got the big name guy is Trayvon Grimes. He's the 5-star. A lot of people expect him to come in and produce right away. 6'4", 202. Thing with him is he's coming off a pretty significant injury. From all reports that I've read, he is fully healthy now. He is on campus. So he's one of those guys I'm really interested to see how he does this fall, if he's able to adjust to the college game quick. If he does, he could easily jump into the starting role or into the 2 deep. Another freshman that's really impressed so far was a early enrollee, and that's Brandon White. Another big guy, 6'2", 210. He came to the Buckeyes as a athlete. No one really knew where he was going to wind up. Spring camp, they moved him out to wide receiver, and he really impressed there. Urban Meyer had a lot of good things to say about him. So he's another guy that, even though he's a true freshman, could work his way up into that mix to play. The Buckeyes love to rotate people through, so he could easily play his way into it. And then the last two freshmen, you got a four-star from Cleveland, Jalen Harris, another big guy, 6'5", 205, a little more raw than Trayvon Grimes, but he was a highly touted guy who could play himself into the rotation too. And then the last guy is more of a prospect or a project. He was out of Texas, Elijah Gardner, 3-star, 6'4", 200, wasn't highly recruited. The Buckeyes got him towards the end of the recruiting cycle. Definitely has the speed, definitely has the size. I think he's just one of those guys that's going to take a year or two and kind of get used to the college game, and the Buckeye coaches are going to see what they can do.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Harris out of Cleveland Heights, 6'5", and Gardner, you list him at 6'4". I've seen 6'5" as well. They're two really tall wide receivers, so there's a lot of talented guys coming into the mix. Eric Glover-Williams, recruited as a cornerback, one of the top 12 in the nation, according to 247 Sports, has actually made some comments about switching over to wide receiver to play some wide receiver, and he's been a special teams ace for the Buckeyes. I want to go back to Paris Campbell. So the obvious comparison is to make Campbell the new Curtis Samuel, because obviously he's taking over the H-back position. And I'm not there for the practice sessions, and I'm not a football scout, but it's tough for me to see Paris Campbell replacing Curtis Samuel. He looks like a long strider. He just doesn't look like the same type player, the type of guy that you would put at H-back to get some jet sweeps and to get some carries out of the backfield and mix and match and move all over the field at times. So I'm kind of interested to know, and maybe you've got some thoughts on why they locked in on Paris Campbell to be that guy.
Well, I think this year we're going to see a lot more of a rotational, more of a situational type of thing for the Buckeyes from that spot. I think as the ability, when you watched him last year on the kick returns, he's got the ability to make people miss, but you're right. He is more of a kind of a straight line type of guy. I think you're going to see a lot, and that might be why they are leaving KJ Hill there too, because he's more of the shifty type of guy. Glover Williams too, if he officially makes that move. Everything I've read is, but then when Ohio State produced their official roster here, I think it was 2 weeks ago, he was listed as a DB. So who knows if that was just a oversight or not, because everything I read during spring was that Glover Williams looked really good. So I think you'll see Campbell, you'll see Glover Williams, and KJ Hill all playing more of a situational type stuff. Like when there's going to be the jet sweeps, I think KJ Hill is going to be the main person in there. And I think Glover Williams is going to be that one that could line up in the backfield and receive the handoff, where I don't think Campbell and KJ Hill are going to be that guy. So I think the Buckeyes realize they don't have a Curtis Samuel. He was a freak, like he was a once in a lifetime thing for the Buckeyes. They haven't had anyone like him. And I think it's because Curtis Samuel was able to come to the Buckeyes as a running back. Then year 2, go be a wide receiver. Then year 3, he was able to combine the both of them. Most guys, they don't have the ability to kind of do that with. So I think you'll see a lot of combination of that. And I think we're really going to see this year where that H-back spot really becomes more of a slot wide receiver than it has been in years past.
Yeah, Paris Campbell caught 13 passes, but his most significant contributions against the best team they played, Clemson, was the 2 kickoff returns where it was one decision and go. It wasn't a shifty kind of situation in the backfield that we saw on a regular basis out of Curtis Samuel, and most famously against Michigan in converting the 4th down play. Can you think of a time in which, and I give a bit of a pass to the wide receiver position, because I don't know if there's a position on the field, offense or defense, that's more dependent on other positions, because the quarterback's at the mercy of the offensive line to a certain extent, and the wide receivers at the mercy of both the offensive line and the quarterback. But even with that being taken into consideration, I was just appalled at the anemic effort. We've talked about it before, of the wide receivers, even when the ball was in vicinity, of not being able to separate from defenders, not being able to outfight defenders for the football when it was a 50-50 proposition, and just not being a factor. And when you look at the recruiting stature of most of these guys, I guess James Clark would be the least of the situation last year, where he was more of a marginal prospect. But most of these guys highly regarded, that none of them separated themselves, you would guess, out of 8 or 10 guys. So that's the one thing I offered up to you, Brandon. And in addition to that, I would think that the Buckeyes and Urban Meyer, Kevin Wilson, would want about 5 to 6 guys. They don't need 10 guys, because then you start to lose continuity with the quarterback. But maybe 5 or 6 guys would be the sweet spot.
Well, and I agree with that. I kind of wrote about that last year, where I feel like the Buckeyes were trying too hard to rotate people through, and they really weren't paying attention to the situation. You had guys like Samuel, and your other starter for most of the year was Paris Campbell. But they're trying to force feed, Terry McLaurin and James Clark in there. Even in that Penn State game, on that final drive, when the Buckeyes needed to score, James Clark was the wide receiver, and he's the one that dropped the touchdown pass there at the end. So I get wanting to rotate people through. I feel like last year they forced it too much, where your starters were a lot better than the backups were, and they were trying to make it happen too much. I don't know if Coach Smith sees Coach Johnson there on the defensive line rotating 10 and 12 guys through and thinks, oh, that's cool, I can do that. This year, I think they're more set up for that. They've recruited really well these past couple years. And even when you look at the chart from, juniors down to the freshmen, you can kind of see the change in the philosophy that the Buckeyes have gone to try to get the more big and physical guy. Because if you look at all the juniors and even KJ Hill, they are all 6'1" or below. Everyone that's came in that's a sophomore or a freshman is all 6'2" or higher, and most of them are 6'4" and 6'5". So I think the wide receivers really did struggle with the 50-50 balls. They struggled with depth, and I think the Buckeyes have really done a good job these last couple of years. I think they're kind of set up this year. When you look at all those 5 stars that are freshmen and sophomores, you kind of expect 2 or 3 of them to make a leap forward this year. So as I said at the beginning, the wide receivers are probably the position that needs to make the biggest leap, and the positional group that I'm most excited to watch during the fall camp here.
Yeah, I think the opposite end of the spectrum is a couple of years ago when Jordan Matthews was at Vanderbilt. There was a season he caught like 115 passes, and nobody else on the roster caught more than like 13, something like that. It was ridiculous. And then, of course, if the NBA Finals taught us anything, with LeBron James playing basically every second of every minute, that you got to have your best guy out there, but you don't want to wear him out. There is a balance to be struck in terms of using your best players in the best spots and the best positions and squeezing the most out of them, but you need to keep them fresh at the same time. Talking Ohio State football each and every Wednesday night with Brandon Zimmerman, and we check out each position as we head toward fall camp here the first week of August, and we've got the entire conversation available for you both on YouTube if you want to watch the two uglies going at it back and forth here, or if you just want to listen to us, then you check out iTunes or Podbean and look up Mark Rogers TV and check out the Ohio State football reports each and every week. So when we move to tight end, I don't know that Marcus Baugh is necessarily the best tight end in the Big Ten, but he might be physically the most imposing guy, a guy that I thought was a little bit underutilized last year in catching 24 passes.
Yeah, I mean, at 6'5", 250, Marcus Baugh was a big guy. He was a big recruit out of California. started last year. The thing with Marcus Ball was like there were times where he would make a play and you would just be in awe of what he did. Definitely that athletic type of the tight end who can excel in the pros if they stay consistent. Last year, Marcus Ball just didn't. I mean, because he would make some play where he would leap over somebody, make a spin, and dive for a touchdown. And then the next play, he would drop a wide open pass, you know. So just very inconsistent for him. But as you mentioned, he's fully entrenched as the starter for the Buckeyes. Very underutilized, which you can say for like every Buckeye tight end for the past 10 years. So you look at all the guys that have gone on to the pros, the Hiremans and the Vanetts, and, you know, you just go back even further, and really they don't do too much till they get to the pros. So it's sort of like the wide receivers are nowadays. So there seems to be a trend there. But I think Marcus Ball is going to have a good year this year. I think bringing in Kevin Wilson will help. He's shown that he can use the tight ends in the past. Last year, Ball had 24 catches, 269 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So the big thing at tight end that I'm more concerned about with Ball being entrenched as a starter is how the backups shake out. Buckeyes have recruited very well at tight end here the past couple years. So last year, the backup was AJ Alexander. He appears to kind of be the backup this year too, but he's got a lot of ahead of him with some true freshmen. If you remember 2 years ago, the Buckeyes brought in 3 of the top 10 tight ends coming out of high school. So the big one that made a lot of strides in spring ball was Luke Farrell, 6'6", 250, big guy. Really impressed the coaching staff, and by the end of spring, he was kind of neck and neck with Alexander. So it'll be interesting to see how Farrell does. Farrell was, I believe, he was like the 4th ranked recruit coming out of high school for the tight end. Right there with him, I believe he was like the number 2 or number 3 tight end coming in out of high school was another big guy, Jake Hossman, 6'4", 252. He was kind of the one that everyone expected to kind of come in and play right away, wound up redshirt last year, and now it appears that Luke Farrell has kind of jumped him. So it'll be interesting to see how he does during fall camp and see if he can get caught up with Farrell. And then the other guy that they brought in was more of a athlete, but he was the number 10 ranked tight end, and it's Kyrie Hawkins, 6'3", 248, so not as big as Farrell and Hossman and Alexander. But you know, so those 3 all top 10 guys for the tight end position is very bright, especially with Kevin Wilson, especially with the quarterbacks that are kind of sitting behind Barrett, who will be taking over next year and in years to come, where they're more of the pocket pure throwers than JT Barrett is. So I think tight end position is looking very well, but as you mentioned, Marcus Ball is the guy this year, and I expect him to have easily a better year than he did last year.
Farrell and Hossman, both out of Ohio. Hossman out of Cincinnati, Farrell out of Perry. Tight end's been a good position for the Buckeyes to recruit out of the state of Ohio, unlike some other positions. And I know that that I've had conversations with our friend Ben Van Oyn about Ohio State's balancing act of trying to recruit nationally to grab the best players versus keeping everybody in the state of Ohio and those relationships intact. But at tight end, it's not been an issue. AJ Alexander, the other guy that you alluded to and talked about, their Brandon out of Virginia, a little less regarded, but I certainly liked what I saw out of AJ Alexander in the spring game. A couple other guys that you know, you were going down memory lane in terms of the Buckeyes tight end position that came to mind. Jake Stoneburner, who's still staying on NFL rosters, and one season had one of those odd stat lines where basically every other pass he caught was for a touchdown. Reed Fragel, who was moved to an offensive line position at one point in his career, and Jake Ballard, who's turned into a pretty decent receiving threat for Eli Manning with the New York Giants. And I couldn't, maybe you can come up with this, Brandon, couldn't remember whether it was Fragel or Ballard who made a really good, surprising catch in the Rose Bowl against Oregon. Ballard, yes, which makes sense because Fragel certainly was moved to the offensive line soon thereafter for the Buckeyes.
That was Jake Ballard. I was there in the stadium. We all went crazy. Yes, an awesome catch.
One of 2 times that the Buckeyes have proven that they had the superior NFL talent, regardless of what the odds makers thought in their matchup against Oregon, and that they were just be worn to shreds playing the mighty Oregon Ducks.
They are so fast.
They're just too fast to keep up with.
They're just too fast.
Yes. Let's look at the NFL talent produced from both schools. That's like 5-1, but they're too fast.
Yes.
And I think the NFL, last time I checked, kind of was high on the speed component in evaluating players. So, I've never
those 40 times. That is all that matters.
Good stuff. All right, talking Ohio State football each and every Wednesday with Brandon Zimmerman. Brandon, we appreciate the time as always, man.
All right, thank you, Mark.